Hello, and thank you for joining us for our latest Finovate webinar. I'm David Penn, Research Analyst for Finovate. Today we feature Jamal Mina, Chief Architect for Financial Services with Red Hat, who will lead our discussion on technology as a business strategy in financial services. When development and compliance are handled separately, financial services organizations often run into challenges. These challenges can be remediated with solid IT automation processes. Without IT automation, a lot of time and money must be used to remain up-to-date, compliant, and secure. A robust automation strategy is an answer, and 89% of financial institutions agree. It is one of their top priorities. But only around 18% of the industry is doing this effectively. Today we explore the focus areas that can be streamlined while deploying IT automation, resulting in teams that are more productive, make fewer errors, enjoy improved collaboration, and more time spent on more meaningful, thoughtful work. As a reminder, this is an interactive presentation, and we look forward to fielding your questions toward the end of the program. Please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen to send your questions to us. And with that, let's get started. Jamil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. So a bit about Red Hat. I work for Red Hat, and Red Hat is the first open source company, first company that went into open source, and we innovated with the idea of enterprise-ready open source software. We've been in the business since 1993, and we went from our roots of being an operating system company that started with Linux. Now we're a hybrid cloud company with automation and a leader in Kubernetes and application transformation and innovation. Myself, I've been in the industry for financial services industry for 24 years before I moved to Red Hat 2 years ago. I worked for large financial institutions in Canada around digital transformation. I enabled DevOps continuous delivery at my previous employer, as well container technology and adoption at scale. So we'll move a little bit into the topic and a little bit around the business context around automation. Recently there has been a lot of news from the federal government and from the financial regulators, either around limiting capital ratios for banks, requiring them to have more cash on hand, or eventually that has changed. And recently, the central banks have started targeting interest rates instead of inflation. For a long time, we've been targeting inflation, where we keep it at around 2%, and now we said no, we're going to let inflation flow, but we're going to target interest rates. As a result of that, things will get more expensive for the consumers, and people themselves, in terms of salaries, will become more expensive, and that will impact the cost for the banks, where the spreads will be reduced. Therefore, they have to find ways to counter the upward pressures and maintain the lending ability by reducing costs, either through cloud, through infrastructure, through development, through security and compliance. Sorry, I had to move the slide forward here. Compliance costs for financial institutions worldwide is around $270 billion. We're talking about now globally, this is about 10% of banks' operating budget, and that brings to legal fees, data processing. Just back in 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act that was introduced added 26% increase of full-time compliance and audit employees on the banks. So compliance, security keeps increasing the pressure, and people that work in the security and the compliance field, they have a lot of pressure on them that a lot of them consider quitting their jobs, that are actually moving out of their job. And the cybersecurity officer has a lifespan of 18 to 24%. So there is a lot of pressure on people to be able to maintain the systems, to be able to track alerts, to be able to understand what's going on in their data center or their cloud. So 89%, as David said, of financial institutions put automation as a top priority. 64% of those is around network automation, 58% around application deployment, and 56% around security. However, only 18% of financial institutions consider themselves effective with automation. And 49% of them, they want to use automation to address time-consuming manual processes. 49% want to address security incidents, and 44% want to shift time to innovate from redundant tasks. So automation is becoming really, really top priorities for these companies. They look at automation to reduce operational costs, reduce risk, and effectively increase their productivity. And before I jump into automation, one of the things that I have to bring up is you cannot automate what you can't see. So asset inventory, being able to see your assets, know where your assets are, identify your gaps is important before we can start automation. And that's a prerequisite for any automation exercise. And actually, I lived that when I was automating my data centers. That's one of the things we have to do is first clean up our assets and knowing where everything is running and what's running on top of it. That was important as well. Financial services report benefits of open source automation software. So open source provides the ability to provide banks with visibility into the code and ensure that any automation that they do does not bring any unknown risk to the organization. 56% see business benefits around reduced operational costs, 51% improve faster innovation, and 55% improve employee productivity. From a technology benefits, we're seeing improved consistency, improved scalability, better resiliency, and improved integration. So challenges and opportunities in terms of automation. Around the challenges, one of the things based on my experience that I see common mistakes that we start with is we start with very lofty and complex objectives. We want to do the most complex use case around automation. And the opportunity here is really start small. We don't have to start with very complex use cases. And in a couple of slides, I will talk about some of these use cases in terms of simplicity, then to go to more complex. Another one is I see companies, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. They talk about the automation, but then they allocate part-time resources around the tasks instead of full-time employees. To look at it and make it part of their objectives and their targets to be able to improve the organization. Another one is organizational structures don't change. So we say we want to do automation, we assign part-time people, then we don't create TOEs around automation. Companies, especially financial institutions that I've worked with in the past, there was a huge emphasis about firefighting. Operational people had an adrenaline rush around going and recovering from the incident. While if a system is working and the people that are supporting it are doing a good job at being proactive, they will never recognize or never got the spotlight in terms of recognition. And that has to switch over and reward the people that are managing systems that do not have incidents versus the other way around. Lack of space of operations to experiment and learn. So we go and we tell operations we need you to automate, and we don't give them access to labs to automate and test and practice. So they need a safe environment to be able to practice that automation. Another one is we take people, we change their title. We say now you're moving from operations to being site reliability engineers, but we don't hire software engineers to be able to do the activity, or we don't hire people with DevOps practices. So we have to recycle or retrain people in order to give them that capability. Last and not least is automation is not always measured. We don't know how to measure automation. I remember when I was doing automation, the first question I was asked is how much money are we saving from all the automation? And then I went and I looked for a baseline to find out how much money we're saving. We did not have any baselines in terms of activities that we do in non-production environments. Because of the nature of ITIL only manage change in a production environment. And non-production tend to be about 3 times the size of production, but we have no metrics around what's happening in non-production. So it was important for me to figure out that baseline and not only be able to calculate against it, but create dashboards so make it visible within the organization, not only for executives, but for employees to see how these things are progressing. We talked about, I talked earlier about starting simple before you go to complex. From a Red Hat perspective, we had the automation journey, and in the automation journey, we worked with a lot of our customers that are trying to automate. And we always recommend is start simple. Take a use case where you're doing one thing, not multiple things at the same time. That does not require a lot of change effort. For example, if you take patching, patching is a single COE activity, while application deployment is you need multiple people to work together, and the AI ops or closed loop incident processing, you need an orchestration of activities to make it happen. Diving deep into the use cases, so we look at the patching automation use case. I mentioned earlier, it's a single COE activity where we have an automation orchestrator that connects to a source where can see that there is new patches that are available to remediate for TVEs, and then that automation tool pushes the change over to the target servers on a nightly basis. For Windows system around, Patch Tuesday. For a Linux system once a month, you push that activity. Another one that caused pressure on financial institution is to move software faster to production. COVID-19 resulted in a reduction of physical channel requirements and increase on digital channels, i.e. Usage. I was talking to one of my ex-colleagues who's an executive of the digital capabilities, and he was telling me that some of the initiatives that were on the back burners that we didn't think that they were going to do anytime within the next 10 years have moved up, and now they are being done now. So that digital channel increase of requirements it caused huge investments to go in towards automation capability. So software application deployment automation is one of these complex use cases that you take local development effort and orchestrate all the activities all the way to go to production. But then you have to deal with regulatory challenges. CI tools like Jenkins, like Bamboo, like other tools are really good at building software, but then they fall apart when you start talking about complex environments. An application financial institution could have typically 10 to 15 environments between dev, QA, performance environment, UAT, user acceptance testing, then we get to production. So all these environments have to be managed, then move them over to production. We need that orchestrator that not only can look at all the environment in a secure fashion, look at RBAC capabilities, tracking controls, and so forth. So that's the second complex use case that I was mentioning earlier. The third complex use case is the closed loop incident processing. Closed loop incident processing, and full disclosure, that was the first use case that I tried to implement, and I failed miserably on. That was my first wave of automation when I was automating a data center, because I needed to classify the event, understand what each event means, and in an organization between network and server events, there are hundreds of thousands of events, and there are some technical debt in there around the events where people did not change the events along the way that are meaningless at this point. So we had to do a whole event management activity. Then once we did the whole event management activity to classify and clean these events, we needed to know what each event is doing to the system, then automate the system. We spent a year trying to do this use case, and we did not have the skills. We did not have the full-time people. We did not have the COE in place to be able to implement this use case. We were able to do one event, one remediation after a year, and we're hoping that people can build on that capability to automate more of these events. We did not. So we stopped that capability. We went back to basic, and then eventually we moved back to that more advanced use case. As you see from the architecture of closed loop incident processing, it's a complex use case. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of assumptions that have to be made in order to be able to remediate the task. So my favorite topic is around enablement at scale, and I titled this slide as developer enablement at scale because it ties in back to continuous deployment capability. To be able to enable continuous deployment at scale within an organization, we need to train hundreds of developers, sometimes thousands of developers, depending on the size of the financial institution. And to be able to achieve that is we need to build that change management process where we can take an individual and say, you have no expertise, no knowledge in continuous deployment, no knowledge in cloud, no knowledge in containers, no knowledge in automation. You don't know what a playbook is. And we're going to understand what you need to do. We're going to train you. We're going to onboard you. And then we're going to mentor you. Once we've mentored an individual, we're going to be able to support you, and we're going to provide you a safe space where you can experiment. With this process, I've used it effectively to train hundreds, if not thousands, of developers and help other organizations implement similar processes to be successful in their automation journey. So automation brings a cultural change. And to be able to implement automation, we have to shift a little bit towards a learning organization where we learn from our mistakes. We collaborate across the organization. So if we take a development team that needs to deploy an application in production, there is a lot of work that has to be, collaboration that has to be done between the different groups. Common tools for a common language to speak across the organization, and that's usually software as code, and I'll dig deeper into that around the tools that I'm going to be talking about. Time to innovate, so you need to give people time to learn. Projects that usually are driven, time-driven and schedule-driven, they have to adapt their schedule to say, I'm going to build into my schedule time for people to learn how to automate so we can go faster. And automation is never done. So you finish one exercise, then eventually there's more automation to be done. There is a lot of work that to be done in an organization. I mentioned the tools earlier. Red Hat Ansible engine. So that's a tool that is very popular in the industry and it's widely used. It's one of its key capability. It's what we call the playbooks. It's a YAML-based playbook and it's human readable. Behind it, it drives Python capabilities that are more complex, but it's the easiest tool possible to learn around automation. It has dynamic inventories where it discovers your environment. It's compatible with all the clouds. You can describe the application and deploy it. And most of all, one of the most important capability is it's software defined. So it has the version control capability where everything goes into your favorite source code control capability, and you can version all these playbooks and the inventories and all the software assets required. So Ansible can automate all kind of technologies from cloud to containers to virtualization to Windows to network to security to monitoring, integrates with DevOps. It's not limited only to RHEL, even though it started with Red Hat. It can automate Windows and storage capabilities. So Ansible can be used, move here, screen up. We can use Ansible to automate the whole footprint in terms from a security perspective, in terms of firewalls, load balancers, applications, containers, cloud servers, infrastructure, storage, network devices. We can configure, we can deploy, we can provision, enable continuous delivery and security and compliance. So 5 steps to automate your business, and I'm leaving some links here for some blogs and publications that are available. Is start with the quick wins, build a pilot and get noticed. This is one of the common mistakes that we see is people do not showcase their successes. Even small successes are very meaningful. I remember what I used to do, I used to actually, in the enterprise newsletter, anyone that has automated a simple task, it didn't have to be complicated. I used to showcase the people that have done it, get them to be proud about their accomplishment and make them as a reference point for people to go talk to them. Integrate your initial successes in continuous learning capabilities. So wherever is successful, document it, publish it, and make it reusable by others to help accelerate that automation adoption. And optimize towards the whole organization. So do not limit to only one group and say, I'm done after a 6-month project. It has to be integrated into the organization where everyone eventually can leverage the capability to grow and learn and deliver. So we, from our services perspective, we provide extensive portfolio, but around automation, what we do is we do a discovery session, we do an automation pilot, and continuous automation in an ongoing support and projects to help to support with the activity. So thank you for your time, and I think I see a lot of questions are coming up through the list here.
Excellent. And again, I want to thank Jamil for that presentation. Quite a bit of information in a relatively short period of time, so there might be an opportunity to sort of maybe go back and underscore a few of the key points. I know that a number of questions have come in, and I do want to encourage those of you who are listening to send us your questions. You can use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, and though we have quite a few questions that have started to come in, we certainly will make room for yours as well if we can. So please go ahead, use that Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to get your question to Jamil about some of the things we've been talking here about automation and compliance. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that have come in so far. Let's take a look here. Okay, here's one. You said that hackers are leveraging AI and machine learning to outpace organizations. What do organizations need to do to catch up and close that gap?
Fight fire with fire. If they're using AI and machine learning to hack the organization, therefore an organization has to move towards an AI capability with something like AI ops, where machine learning can be leveraged to go through thousands of events and be able to build trends, and you teach the machine around the trends capability. That reduces the pressure on people and increases the ability to identify the real event versus chasing around some false positives.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think one thing people might find it a little bit curious. I know I did just to my ear to think of these hackers in a sense outgunning organizations, almost like something out of the Prohibition 30s. Is it so much a case that they've got more and better technology, or just that they're able to focus on a specific task of cybercrime compared to these other organizations that are doing a million other things in addition to trying to defend themselves against cybercrime?
So it's interesting. It's interesting because it's two sides of two things that are happening here. One is they can concentrate and they can focus to attack while organizations are spending millions of dollars to defend. But as well, technology has become more affordable for hackers to be able to use machine learning capabilities without having to spend millions of dollars. You know, you can build yourself something on one of the clouds with TensorFlow or Jupyter notebooks and build a machine learning capability or AI capability to be able to leverage and attack someone. So that decrease of barrier of entrance for technology has provided hackers with additional capabilities.
That makes a great deal of sense. I wanted to take a look at another question that came in, and this is actually something that as soon as I heard that Red Hat was involved and going to be presenting this webinar, this is one of the things that came to mind for myself about Red Hat. Red Hat has a long pedigree in open source technology, arguably one of the pioneers in terms of open source technology. So the question asks, why is an open source approach important in this particular context, and what value does that bring?
Yeah. So if you think about Red Hat, we develop in upstream communities first, then we take from upstream to downstream, and we create a product. Once a product is in upstream, you have thousands of developers looking at the code, and they could come from many industries, and we have some financial institution customers that develop in upstreams and contribute to these technologies. What it provides that high visibility, and everybody is looking for a problem to solve. And the problem that could be for one of the banks could be usable for the other banks. As a result, that spread of having that security holes in the code disappears quickly because of the amount of people and talent contributing to these events, to this code.
Right. Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense. It's basically the same sort of benefits that open source provides in most contexts, that ability to more quickly and more transparently understand what might be happening at any point along in the system. Let's see. I've got a couple more that have just come in here as well. Again, if you have a question for Jamil, please feel free to send it to us. You can use the Ask a Question button on your screen, and that question will get right into us. We'll queue it up, and we'll get it online. Let's see here. Here's a question about automation. Another comment that you made. You noted that you can't automate what you can't see. Is this a common initial problem with the companies that you work with?
Typically, yes. You know, if you think of a typical bank that has thousands of systems in place, to be able to, I remember one of my earlier projects was around cleaning up the CMDB and ensuring that we have visibility into the system of what's running what's being documented. That's a typical problem. We've added dynamic discovery to Ansible, so we can go and discover the tool. And Ansible is agentless. So we can scroll through the data center and discover the various systems that are available. But without knowing what you have, it's hard to know if you can automate it even. You've got some systems that do not have a CLI capability or an API capability because they've been designed to be driven by a mouse click for configuration, installation, and management. Then you can't automate those. So you got to move towards an automation architecture through understanding your inventory and what you have in the system.
Right. And that idea of understanding inventory coming up once again is a key point. Let's see. Here's a question that asks a little bit more specifically about Ansible, which you talked quite a bit about at length. And this question reads, has Red Hat leveraged Ansible at financial services companies for IT security automation? There's a critical question for IT security automation.
So if you go back to my answer around your open source, so Red Hat does the open source not for the sake of open source, because what becomes popular in the community. So the community gets together and the community decides of what's popular and what's to be used, then we downstream it into a product. And a lot of our requirements comes from financial institutions. So definitely we are working with financial institutions on using Ansible for infrastructure automation. And if you think of appliances and devices like enterprise firewalls or intrusion detection systems, usually you don't have the ability to install an agent. By its nature, Ansible, being agentless, can remotely connect to these devices, configure them, and make changes to them without being intrusive to the device itself.
I'm thinking some of the challenges. One of the things you mentioned early on, or you presented early on, was a fairly extensive list of both challenges and opportunities in the process. And I'm curious about some of those challenges and maybe taking a look at them a little bit more. I'm curious about any of the particular challenges that you found that companies face that are maybe particular common. If you're going to say, here's the one or the two top things that whenever I sit down with a company, these are the things that you have to deal with. You mentioned, for example, the idea of companies not really having a sense of what they've got to automate, and they're already wanting you to automate it, and that kind of maybe you have to go backwards a little bit before you can move forwards. I'm curious if there are other challenges that are particularly either common or particularly nettlesome that you have to work with when you're working with companies in this process.
Yeah. So I'm going to draw on my own experience and
Good.
My previous experiences before I started working with Red Hat is when we introduced automation we spent an extensive amount of capital to automate the data center, but no one was using automation. And we were working with the vendor to figure out, what's the challenge? How do other customers like us solve the same problem? And the company did not have an answer in terms of methodology and approach, in terms of how do you change your culture, how do you change your organization. Automation is a transformational journey that it requires it requires organizational and process changes to enable automation within the organization. So for example, some of the most extreme cases that you could look at to say, do not fix anything in production manually, but deliver everything through a pipeline. That takes foresight and guts and a strong organizational model to say, I'm going to follow that path regardless how long it's going to take me to resolve an incident, and I'm not going to fall into my older habit of firefighting and doing everything manually until the organization become properly or fully automated. So going back to your question, what are the challenges? In my mind, the challenges is creating the right COE in place that will enable automation, train the people, and change the culture to automation first.
Interesting. I wanted to follow up a little bit. I'm glad you mentioned that issue about culture and changing the culture first, or to an automation culture first. But I also wanted to touch on something else that you talked about, and it was the idea. A lot of times we think of companies being relatively reluctant to make these changes for a variety of reasons, whether it's cost, culture, these sorts of things, just simply not understanding. But then you mentioned sort of the other end of that spectrum, which is the companies that want to do everything at once. Either it's something you've always wanted to do, maybe it's because of what's happened with COVID, and you mentioned companies have had a lot of things on the shelves deciding, hey, now is the time we've really got to get going, or maybe there's a personnel shift, and now you have a new person in place who really wants to take off with some of these digital, these automation initiatives. But then the point I thought that you made, which was very, very important, was the idea that these companies, it's great to be excited, it's great to be ready to go, but these companies do have to be wary of trying to get it all done at once. And I'm particularly curious about your explaining of that and how you deal with those companies that are very eager to get started but kind of have to be slowed down so they don't get themselves into something that maybe sours them on the experience.
Yeah, so it's like almost like a building block of capability. If I want to go to an automation first capability, we mentioned the culture is take a small bite chunks in terms of automation. Do not take lofty objectives, but build the foundation for it first. So if you take traditionally in financial institutions, between engineering and operational people, they did not have the same development capability, people that work in development, such as using source code management tools, branching, pull requests. So you got to train them into that DevOps capability first, so they know how to use to shift towards the DevOps capability. Then take on small capabilities to say, I'm going to automate these small capabilities. And I mentioned something during my presentation is have a safe place to experiment, because when you're undertaking something that is brand new, you need a place where to try and fail, then eventually try it in production.
That's a really excellent point. I think a lot of times when we think about culture, and I've got just another sort of related question on culture that's come in, is the idea of, okay, are we just ready to do it? Do we have a gung-ho culture that really wants to try things? But I think that the point that you mentioned critically is that space to not just try things, but to fail, to sort of get out there on the branch a little bit, out there on a limb, and try some of these things, but to have both the organizational understanding and the culture that understands that trying these things, having to go back to the drawing board is just a part of the process of moving forward and not reason for greater retrenchment or anything like that. I think that's a very, very important thing, as a lot of these companies are eager to get involved, know they need to do these things, but have to understand that the process might not just be a straightforward staircase upward, I think.
Yeah.
Again, here's a question that came in. Maybe it was a follow-up on that last question, talking about the challenges of changing culture and the importance of executive buy-in. Is that essentially what you need, that you need that top-down, or is it simply a matter of having a key person in a key place who is able to often pave the way for the sort of change that you need?
It's interesting because I worked in the two types of organization. I worked in top-down organization and organizations such as Red Hat with a meritocracy where the best ideas emerge from ground up. But definitely in an organization that is top-down where risk is important, because in reality, in financial institutions, risk is the primary driver. Is you don't want to lose money and you don't want to compromise your reputational capital with an online system. So having that top-down buy-in is important, but having the right people in place to be able to achieve these results is important as well. And I go back to the culture when risk was is being mitigated through checklists, then you have to move the players around that trust a checklist model for management towards, verify through automation, verify through code, verify through what the tool gives you as information instead of let me go through a checklist and ask you if you've done everything you're supposed to do. So I guess the answer is top down and having the right players in the right places to be able to do things differently and hire people that think differently than you. I think that's important, because if you've grown in a financial institution throughout your career and achieve that leadership level, you trust the way people that do it the same way you do it. So you have to take a risk and hire people that do it differently than you, based on new methodologies, and that could be hard to do.
Yeah. Hard but a critical point as well. We got another interesting question that came in, and it actually reminded me of some of the questions about technology and digital transformation that were in our conference last week, Finovate Fall Digital, that you took part in as well. And this question has to do with metrics, and I really think this is a very, very interesting one. How do companies find the right automation metric? How do you measure? Say you've gone through these processes, you've done some of the things that we've discussed. How do you measure automation success?
So if I take a lean methodology a little bit, lean talks about non-value add activity. Because if you think of technical tasks such as provisioning a virtual machine, takes 10 minutes. The event leading up to provisioning a virtual machine takes probably between 10 days to 2 months, depending on the organization. Between filling up the paperwork, sitting in a CAB meeting, getting financial approval, having a conference call around the specs of the machine and so forth. Look at eliminating anything that is not adding value to that 10-minute activity to provision the 15-minute machine, and highlight that non-value activity in a dashboard to say, I eliminated X amount of non-value add activities to achieve a value add. And create a dashboard that counts these non-value add activities and try to translate them into work month or work hours, so the organization knows how much people they would have to hire to be able to achieve the same productivity. So give you an example. When we automated continuous delivery for an application, we made an assumption that for each deployment in production, we're doing 10 in non-production, because we didn't have visibility into metrics in non-production. The actual reality, we're doing about 50. Once we've automated the whole pipeline, developers were doing 1,000. So just imagine the spread between the baseline of 10 that we assumed to 1,000 that they were actually doing because of automation. We would have had to hire insane amount of people to be able to get to that 1,000 to achieve the velocity that development team has achieved using automation.
Excellent. Fascinating. I want to thank everyone who's sent in questions. I'm afraid we're coming up on the end of our time. I think we've gotten to most of them. Some of them were sort of similar, so hopefully we were able to address some of the questions that some of you had, again, about things like culture, things about open source technology. One thing I wanted to add for folks is that Red Hat, in this presentation, obviously, has quite a few blog posted and even some pieces in our halftime review e-magazine on this topic of automation. So if there are folks who'd like to find out more, get a little bit of a deep dive, maybe something they can sort of sit and pore over, definitely be sure to check out some of the resources available at Red Hat in terms of their own blog pieces and white papers on automation, as well as, again, some of the upcoming content that we're going to have in the halftime review e-magazine, also discussing this issue of automation. So with that, I want to thank very much Jamil Mira, Chief Architect for Financial Services with Red Hat, for joining us. A really fascinating conversation on something that many companies, I'm sure, are increasingly involved in right now, both with regard to the digital transformation, coping with COVID, and somebody just taking advantage of some of the technologies that are becoming increasingly accessible to them. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you for having me on Finovate, David.
Great. And thank you for joining us. I would like to let all of our attendees know that a copy of the presentation will be available on the Finovate blog in the days to come. So if you'd like to go back over it, there's quite a lot of information on those slides that we went through. That'll give you another opportunity to review that. And again, feel free to check out the Red Hat website for more information, white papers, and research on automation. Thanks again for joining us very much. Have a great week, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Bye-bye.